Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad, and welcome to everyone who's online.
Yes, I know this is a very important episode, and you have done so many wonderful ones. But this is something very current and very important that we need to cover tonight. And I'd like you to begin so we can get in as much as possible.
Yes, I wanted to use this last day of the year and a transition to the new year as an occasion also to look back at some of the things we have discussed as part of our current affairs. And for those who have not seen the series from the beginning, I would highly recommend that you do watch what we have covered right at the start, because there we set a larger picture of the underlying drivers, both spiritual and occult, which are, so to say, guiding, driving, even correcting evolutionary trends, from the spiritual influences to take humanity forward in an accelerated evolution, and from certain asuric tendencies to reverse that, to delay that, or even to neutralize the evolutionary potential. And it's a struggle which finally gets organized among human beings depending on human loyalties. The human lifetime and the human perspective is very short. We tend to look at things within the scope of our lifetime, or even less within a time of our career, which might be 20 years or a little more perhaps at best. But the forces which drive the human beings have a perspective across centuries. So every 20 years, they may make small shifts, and over a few centuries, you find the whole movement and the structure and the direction that it has set, and both from the positive and the negative side. And we have to understand that there are people who choose consciously to align with the asuric interests, even as there are those who choose consciously to align with the divine. And as things were, and I'm deliberately using the past tense here, as things were until now, those in political power, economic power, banking systems, etc., media power, and entertainment power, and even bureaucratic and other power systems, had largely hijacked the global interests into what seemed to be more asuric in general direction. And what we discussed over many of these sessions was that there are still disruptors, and some of them major disruptors, who have managed to get to positions of power, who are also breaking that agenda. In all this, we went back to Sri Aurobindo's uh, guidance, where nearly 100 years ago, he describes all these trends going back centuries, but also foresees the future following precisely the underlying psycho spiritual imperatives, which includes, among other things, the drive of divine Shakti, divine energy, which works through what we call nature, and how it is leading things, it is guiding things, even using the negative setbacks to push forward the evolutionary objectives. Yet, a lot depends on the human beings and our readiness, which determines how rapidly things can go one way or not. And in these texts, though we have not looked at the whole thing in detail, and I was reviewing for today again, there are some extraordinary statements he makes, and it is worth someday to go through the entire text with this understanding of current affairs. So he describes how, for example, with the larger intention of unification of the world, how the First World War and the Second World War were used by nature. Although the wars themselves were divisive and contrary to the unification, that was used by nature or the divine Shakti to accelerate the formation of the unifying forces. In the first case, it was the League of Nations. In the second case, it was the United Nations Organization, UNO, which Sri Aurobindo points the limitations of both and points to a potential third organization, when this is proved insufficient for the purpose. And we are seeing not only the UN, but the World Bank, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, etc., which have all been so misused in the last few decades that people are beginning to wake up. He had also warned how there would be attempts to crush human freedom by this kind of a centralized world state. And each time that the effort would be made, it could be used to actually accelerate the awakening of humanity to avoid this danger. And ideally, he speaks of actually three structures. One is centralized world state. The second is a more federal structure. A third, which is a loose collaboration, confederation is the word he uses, loose confederation, which would be the optimum. So this is the background against which we have been looking at events. And the last session we had was probably sometime in September. But since then, so much has happened that I had been leaving short notes for myself. And when I look at the notes, I find it's a really, really long list. So what I propose to do is to rapidly go through this list. And my intention is not to inform you of events. Most people are already better informed, even than I. But to help you to see behind events, what are the forces and compulsions which drive, and often to see through the media in order to be able to look at how they lie to you or how they try to manipulate your thoughts or your actions, so that you may become self-sufficient and be able to help others also eventually to wake up and see things for what they actually are. The goal is this. So it's not my intention to inform you of things. That's why I always prefer to look in hindsight, where analysis is more easy than to look ahead and speculate, and that's always risky. So it's a retrospective view that I want to take, but from that, pointing towards the future, and I've titled this especially the theme for today as the cautious optimism as the title. Because there is optimism, there is a good ground for optimism, but with caution, and we have to be aware of what are the elements of caution. So some of the interesting things which we saw happen quite rapidly in the last few months. Of course, the US elections was central to it all, but there's a ripple effect. And it's interesting to see how Trump's imminent election, or not, as it was then, had such a tension across the world on global affairs. And you have to really think of why one man's election should have such a strong effect. What is it that he stands for, or what is it that the other side that is against him fears if he comes to power? And then you understand why should that matter so much? And why US elections? Why not UK elections? Even India elections were more important than UK elections or France elections. And we have discussed some of these things before, so I won't repeat. But observe how, for quite a long time, they kept saying Biden is perfectly healthy. At some point, there was this switchover where Kamala Harris becomes the presidential nominee without passing through elections. So she becomes vice president without any electoral process. She becomes presidential nominee without an electoral process. Although earlier, when she tried to stand for president, she was thrown out even without any meaningful entry. And so by a roundabout process, she actually becomes the presidential nominee, bypassing all those who had been selected by the Democrat Party. And how that mechanism of bypass was done, and so skillfully that no one questioned it. For that, you have to really study how the media lies to you and manipulates you. So observe that. That's one important point. And they kept saying Biden is healthy until she comes as presidential nominee, at which point there's this whole tension, and I'd mentioned that, where Obama did not certify her. He did not support her for nearly a week, and then finally he came around and said, okay, we back you. And Biden felt slighted because the media was promoting her and not him, although he was president, and there was a tension between them. And suddenly now the media began to speak of how Biden was actually heading for dementia. He was forgetting things, and he had been sick for the last 2 years at least, and he was not competent to be president. All this information starts coming out. And you have to ask yourself, how did the same media which was telling you he was perfectly healthy for 4 years now start telling you that he has been sick for 2 years and actually doesn't deserve to be president? It's interesting. There was also a television series which had someone resembling Biden, who was being presented, presented as US president, and the resemblance is amazing. It's on Netflix. I think it's called Diplomat. And then suddenly he dies because he's so sick, and his VP, who's a woman, becomes president. Think about how simultaneously these television series are presented to program you to behave in a particular way. And you understand, we spoke earlier of how Zelensky was made president in a television series from which he was then promoted to actual presidentship. So understand how powerfully the media is weaponized against you. Notice also there was an urgency before the elections for so many events to be done. We saw in Ukraine an acceleration of the war. All the latest missiles and technologies had to be tested. Now, what is fascinating is, and I've already spoken about how it's become a testing ground, it's no more a conventional war at all. There is no war interest. There are only military interests and business interests. And they are testing all the latest technologies. Literally, in the last 2 years, the new battleground of the future has been defined and tested in Ukraine and Russia at the cost of the Ukrainian deaths and, of course, Russian deaths. But the new battleground now is not at all anymore about airplanes or warships. It's about hypersonic missiles, which are so fast that you cannot put a counter to them by a counter missile. And Kinzhal is the Russian hypersonic missile, which openly Putin said, I challenge the US or the European Union or NATO to stop this missile. And he demonstrated multiple times how it was impervious to being stopped. On the other side, drones have become the most powerful weapon. Small, tiny, difficult to track drones loaded with bombs. And they have been weaponized on a scale that is now so scary that future wars will become guerrilla warfare in the middle of cities. As we saw, there was drone attacks in the middle of Moscow, controlled from Ukraine. Or as recently you saw, several high-level military in Russia were killed by bombers. And the last bomber who killed one of the senior generals in Russia, and Ukraine took responsibility for it. What they said was, the man who actually put the bomb, placed a bomb on a small motorbike, near the house of this general. As he comes out, the bomb explodes. But the man who's placed the bomb is in a nearby car, and he's live streaming through his mobile phone the actual bomb and the man coming to the bomb, all the way to Ukraine, from where they detonate by remote the bomb. Now think about what this means. It means every individual in the middle of every city becomes a potential terrorist, but controlled from around the world on the other side. Any vehicle, even a bicycle or a motorcycle, could become a bomb to anyone. If you push forward the implications of this as a weaponized strategy of warfare, the perspective of life is mind-blowing, mind-numbing. It means nobody is safe anywhere. The only way you can be safe is if you live in a military ghetto type, battalion type space, on a military highly secure facility. And if you travel, even if you go by car, you don't know if a drone could come and bomb you from above. And there's no way to protect against anything. So these are some of the implications of the war as it's being tested and the weapons being tested in Ukraine. So that is one aspect I want to point to, observe and notice what it foretells for the future of warfare itself. As a consequence, China changed all its weapons. India began to replan its whole warfare strategies everywhere, US, UK, Germany. And you see how the media was hyping up. It's fascinating to see how even in Germany or France, the media was hyping people to want to go and join the war in Ukraine because the number of young people in Ukraine is so small. People have been killed and literally the youth population has been wiped out. But that sending people now from across, and it's quite fascinating to see how people are easily programmed. On the other side, you had the Iran-Israel struggle, and I'm not calling it a Palestinian struggle. It's actually Iran through the front of the Hamas and Hezbollah. And you see how the Iranian president died in a helicopter crash. Nobody says who did it. Possibly it was an accident. Nevertheless, it was the most significant change in the Iranian political power structure. At the same time, very close to that period, we find the immediate attack, soon after, immediate attack. And the timing is suggestive that even that helicopter crash was not accidental. Hezbollah head is killed while he is visiting Iran, I believe. Hamas head is killed within a day. And the entire Hamas leadership was eliminated through pager bombs and then walkie-talkie bombs. And Israel now has openly spoken about how they did that whole operation. And again, I want to point to this to show you how the nature of warfare has changed, but also the long-term strategy planning that went into an operation like this. Going back about 15 years, Israel found out that the Hamas leadership and the Hezbollah leadership were looking for pagers because they did not trust mobile phones which could be hacked by Israel. So they created a front company, series of shell companies layered, took the name of a Taiwanese company which was authentic that Hezbollah leadership was interested in, hired someone from that company who was interfacing with Hezbollah into their new European company, offered the same model with slight improvements, slightly heavier and larger because they had to insert a bomb in the battery, and sold it, nearly 5,000 of the pagers, to the Hezbollah leadership. Now think about what an operation, the complexity of the operation, the detailing to make it real. And there was an interview a few days ago by the two operatives of the Mossad who spoke about what they had to do to set it up. And they said, literally, we set up like a stage. We have set a stage, we have created an appearance, and we are playing the make-believe game, setting up appearances of reality and layered. So Hezbollah leadership ends up buying this, thinking it's a great deal that they've got. And then they're sold as a backup walkie-talkies, which also have the same bombs, all of which are manufactured in Israel and then sold to the Hezbollah leadership. Think of what a shock it is for the leadership to suddenly realize how they've been conned. And then on that day, the bombs explode, triggered from Israel, all simultaneously. And how was it done? A signal is sent to all the pagers, and they were explaining how they tested different kinds of ringtones to see which was the best ringtone which would create urgency. They tested how much time it would take for you to pull out the pager from your pocket and look at the message, averaging to 7 seconds. And then what is the power of explosive needed to just damage one person and not a neighbor? And I'm using the word damage because the goal in this whole strategy was not to kill the person entirely, but to maim them seriously. Hand lost, part of the face, eyes lost, part of the torso lost, blown up by a bomb, but the next person should not be affected. The precision of thought and testing that went into this is something actually, although it's so negative to speak of, that kind of precise thinking and planning is something extraordinary. And you will recall the mother's observation about the nature of the Israeli people as distinct from the Palestinian people. And the whole thing makes so much sense. But it's almost taken to a form of an art and with precision. Every detail thought out. So when actually these bombs, about 3,000 of them, I believe, exploded all within a short time, and the next day when they had shifted to walkie-talkies, those exploded. At some point, the Hezbollah head, who was 30 meters underground at the bottom of a giant building next to a UN school, and that was their method of defense by setting themselves up near these facilities, Israel sends a precision bomb that explodes 30 meters underground and knocks out the entire bunker. Now, again, the kind of precision involved and in the targeting, ensuring they knew where he was. It's one of the most closely guarded secrets of the entire leadership. They penetrated Hezbollah leadership to that point and managed to knock him out. It literally destroyed the entire Hezbollah leadership, at the same time Hamas leadership. Now, the timing of all this is crucial because all this was done in a hurry before US elections. Why? because the moment Trump comes to power, this opportunity would be lost. He would enforce the end of the war, enforce peace. So it was critical for Israel to finish the Hamas and Hezbollah leadership as completely as possible before peace is imposed, so that it would be at least some meaningful peace. But I'm pointing to the timing and the urgency of these. Remember, they had these pager bombs for the last several years. Why now? And this is the point I want to make. So, notice also, there's an interesting observation Sri Aurobindo makes, and this is again about the Jewish people. He says, they suffered so much that at some point when they come to power, they turn around and impose the same suffering. Now, this was put in the context of an observation where Sri Aurobindo was asked, Gandhi's Mahatma, not really, that's not his name, but the title, Gandhi's theory that the more you suffer, the more you are purified and the more compassion you have. Again, you'll find this spoken in many Buddhist traditions. Suffering gives you compassion. Sri Aurobindo says that's bad psychology. The reality is when you suffer too much, it hardens you. And when you come to power, you impose the same suffering on others, not realizing, or sometimes in a vengeance of reaction. And he gives the example of the Jewish people. When they finally got free from the suffering that was imposed on them, they turned around and began to be as harsh with those who were opposing them. So you see something of this psychology also in the way Israel tends to defend itself. But the psychology underlying is how one tends to become a replica of that on which you fixate yourself. Now, this has very important spiritual implications, and I'm just going to highlight that. Do not obsess with what you dislike. Do not obsess with what you hate. Do not focus on the enemy. Because what you focus upon is what you tend to become like, even if it is to survive, to defend yourself. So I'm not saying that Israel could have done differently because, well, they have to survive when they're surrounded by so many enemies. But the problem is this: the moment you focus on the negatives, you tend to absorb them. This is again an observation Sri Aurobindo makes, the mother speaks of this also, that don't imitate someone. As fun, in laughter, you imitate someone's behavior, you tend to absorb that, and that tends to become yours. But it's the same thing, even if you dislike something and focus on it, you tend to become like that. So this is an important principle from a spiritual point of view we have to recognize. Recognizing what is happening with them, focus on what is true within you. Even though you have to respond with force, with extreme force if needed, still not out of hate or fear principally. You may have fear, you may have hate on the surface, but your primary driver has to be doing what is right at that moment. From a deeper, even perhaps if you could evolve sufficiently, from a compassionate poise, you have to kill that which is about to kill you. But this is a sadhana in itself, and we don't expect an entire country to be able to do that, but I'm observing the underlying psychological and spiritual principles and messages. And this is the problem of all hate-driven or fear-driven action. On the other side, from the Palestinian or other Hamas or Hezbollah groups, it's the same story. When they feed on the hate or fear, it leads to the same cycle. I was giving once this example of the difference between the Indian army and the Pakistani army. You see, on the border, they're facing each other. You know what happened during the time when there was the Kargil war, when Pakistan had come in on top of a mountain in the Himalayas, and from Kargil were shooting. The Indian forces had to, it was a very painful response. Many people had to die. They had to climb up the mountain from the back, take over the center, and on hand-to-hand battle. It's one of the most gruesome passages of recent warfare. But the Indian soldiers who had been initially captured by the Pakistani, they hung them upside down, cut off their genitals, cut off their tongues, cut off their eyes, let them bleed to death in the most painful way. This kind of perverse hatred which you find in the Pakistani army, contrast that with the Indian army who, when they killed the terrorists and their bodies were there, they were Muslims, so they offered the bodies back to the Pakistani army for a suitable burial. The Pakistani army denied that they were their soldiers. So the Indian soldier gave them a decent Islamic burial on the Indian soil. And you see the big difference here in the value system. So in one of the talks some 25 years ago, I had pointed out that Pakistani army is driven by fear and hate, and the Indian army is driven by love. So there's a question, of course, what do you mean by love? So not that you love the enemy, you love an ideal greater than yourself, your family, your nation, your civilization, your values, something which is greater than you. You fight to protect that. What does the other side fight for? They don't fight for anything. They fight against what they fear or hate. Or at best, if there's the religious indoctrination, oh, you'll get your reward in heaven, whatever that might be. But it's not something you love. It's rather greed for something to get out of this suffering. There's a very interesting video which I just saw a few days ago of a group of Muslim children near in Karnataka, and the television interviewer goes to them and asks, who do you support during the elections? And they say, oh, we are against whoever, Modi and others. And they don't really care who it is. They say, we want an Islamic government. So when our government comes to power, we'll destroy all your temples and replace them with mosques. And these are children. They don't even know what they're talking about. And then they say very openly, they speak of, up there in heaven, there is this beautiful worlds, and the fairies who are there, they are so wonderful. That world is so great. We will get that in our heaven. And if she spits in water, the water will become sweet like honey, and that's the water we will drink. And these young boys, they're hardly 12 or 13, are mugging and repeating all this and believing it. That's the indoctrination. And then the interviewer asks, what are you studying? What books? Which school do you go to? They say, we don't go to school. All they have is the indoctrination. What do you do all day? We play. So there's a whole generation that's being brought up with this ideology in the middle, across India, in the middle of cities. And you have to understand that's the mentality that is also, you see, largely within Palestine. So this is still, I'm pointing to the struggle and the nature of difference of values across the border. So this is broadly about the Israeli and Hamas war. I don't even call it Palestinian war, it's a Hamas war. But Palestine's alignment to Hamas and Hezbollah, unfortunately. But it also reminded me of how, if Israel could do this across 15 years, think of what the Chinese Communist Party would be doing through all the equipment that they sell, including USB sticks. I remember, I've mentioned this before, about 20 years back, when cheap USB sticks came and you'd get these little sticks you stick into your computer. When you stick it in, first few seconds, it would install all the drivers. Now, a driver installation is at the deepest core of the operating system at the highest security clearance level. So, literally, China's company was inserting in your operating system a software in the deepest core of it in order to use the stick. And I said, if I were trying to infect the world with my spyware, I would spread out cheapest USB sticks. People would buy them because they are cheap across the world, and all those computers would be accessible if that were your intelligence objectives, isn't it? So how do you know that was not done? Very likely it was done. But this is the kind of thinking that goes into the intelligence agencies when they think long-term and plan long-term. Just as an aside to make you aware of how this works, through the Windows operating system, Apple operating system, Linux operating system, there are gatekeepers who control the deepest code. And often these gatekeepers are under pressure of the intelligence agencies, or they represent them. And under US law, the NSA, National Security Agency, has a right to demand insertion of any code into any software that is US-based company. So if it's Apple or Microsoft or any of these, if it's US-based company, they can insert that code, and they're not allowed by law to speak about it. And that's how things are inserted in global software. Backdoors are inserted. And even the US has a law that says a patent which has above 20% efficiency, the government has a right to suppress it. So even a battery or a solar cell above 20% efficiency, the US government can seize it and suppress it. Why? Why is high efficiency of power so dangerous to them? And you have to think of the implications again. So I don't go into that. We also saw some very interesting things happening in India with the Supreme Court. And I had given a few examples earlier, but something even more interesting happened, that the Supreme Court finally freed Kejriwal, who had been in jail, as well as several of his colleagues who had been in jail for many months. And the reason was fascinating. The declared statement was that the impression of the Supreme Court judge was that the intention of the Enforcement Directorate was not right. On this ground, they released several people who had been arrested on the evidence that had been provided. The impression of intention. I've noted these words, I've noted the links just to tell you how corrupt the system has become. And they upheld the arrest itself as invalid on technical grounds. The other thing was, again, several people were released by the same Supreme Court saying, you have 500 pages of documentation of their crimes. That's going to take too long through the court system, so we have to release the person. In other words, the court is saying, we are so inefficient that you have too much evidence, so we're going to release the person because you have too much evidence for us to process. And had it been 50 pages, they would have said, that's too little evidence, it can't be genuine, so we release the person. And this shows you to what extent the courts have been bought out, and the corruption, the rot has crept into the highest levels of the judiciary. None of what I'm saying is my statement. You'll find many opinion makers across the country also speaking about this quite openly. But it does not bode well for the future of the country when the rot goes so deep on these institutions on which you depend for justice. But then there was a major result as an outcome. Once Kejriwal was released as Delhi Chief Minister who was in jail for several months, he should have resigned. He didn't. After he is released, he resigns and announces somebody who will replace him. And remember, it's not an election by the party, it's his selection. So again, you see, there is no democratic framework. The person he selects is a lady called Atishi Marlena. She is chosen because she has personal loyalty to him, and she can be trusted to do his bidding. Now, here's the interesting part, which the media was not speaking openly about. First of all, her name is Atishi Marlena. What is this Marlena? And from the point she gets elected, this Marlena name is suppressed. They keep speaking of Atishi only. And the media completely plays the game. What is Marlena? So, her father's name is Vijay Singh. He was a professor at Delhi University. He was a hardcore communist. So hardcore that he names his daughter, he changes his name. He replaces the family name by Marlena, which is a short for Marx Lenin. So he's naming his daughter's surname with Marx and Lenin. And this is openly stated and proudly. All her life, she's proudly stated her leftist roots. And you have to ask yourself, a person who's so deeply leftist indoctrinated is now made chief minister by Kejriwal. What does that tell you about the overall agenda of the party itself? What does that tell you about the controls and implications of who actually runs the party? Think about this and notice how the media covered up all these details and continues still to hide this fact about her name. When she's made chief minister and she's sworn in, she declares openly that the actual chief minister is Kejriwal. She's only his representative. She places the chief minister's chair in a meeting with empty because he's the one who's supposed to sit there. And she takes a small chair next to his chair and declares that this is like Bharat kept Ram's slippers. So, when Ram goes into the Vanavas, the forest, because of a promise, and he has to go to the forest, his youngest brother keeps his slippers and rules in the name of Rama, keeping the slippers in place of Rama. She refers to this and says Kejriwal for her is Rama, and she's keeping his chair warm for him. Now think about the extent to which the values of political responsibility are reduced. It's a pretense, it's a show, it's fake, it's unreal, and there is no morality, there is no high ground, there is no sense of responsibility. It is all personality built for ideological objectives. And this is what politics has come to. We must understand again the implications of this, especially at least as regards that party. But also the cheek of mentioning that as Ram, as if he is Ram, he is divine incarnation. And again, that you have to really question the mentality which would speak like this. There's another video which I saw, which is interesting because the Congress party has been pushing for a caste census, and it's the best way to divide the country. It's again a leftist agenda, which was attempted in the US also to create divisions along different communities. And it's the agenda which Congress is pushing for. So there's a very interesting video. I'm just going in sequence with many important things, but there's an interesting video where the TV interviewer is asking this Muslim person, do you support caste? He says, yes, I support caste census. So the person asks, what is your caste? The Muslim man says, I'm a Muslim. So the interviewer asks him, but that is your religion. What is your caste? So the man is flummoxed. So he asks another boy who's next to him, who's a Muslim, do you think caste should be conducted? He says, yes, it must be done. So then he's asked, are you Shia, Sunni, Ahmadiyya, Bohra, or otherwise? He got angry. He says, no, but I'm a Muslim. I'm not these things. At which point the Hindu who's there says, then why do you call me a Yadav? I'm a Hindu. Now you notice how the mentality is to divide what seems to be your target into as many pieces as possible. So the leftists and many of the religious indoctrinators are particularly targeting the Hindu community, cutting them along caste lines so that they will vote differently, they can be played and manipulated. But when it comes to their own, in Christianity, they call them the flock. They're shepherds and you are the flock, you are sheep. You're not supposed to think, you're supposed to follow the shepherd blindly. So they call them flock. So even the implications there are quite troubling. And they will protect them. They will group them. They'll say, you are Christians or you are Muslims. Don't divide yourself along whatever communities. But on the other side, the goal is to divide as much as possible. And again, you have to think of why. One of the objectives, and which has been very effective here, has been to split one of the communities, which is the Punjabi community, which, as you know, ultimately are all Hindus. But even the Sikh tradition is actually built up to protect Sanatana Dharma. So what you see there is the terrorism revived after 20 years under Kejriwal's rule in Punjab. And what this has led to is again the same old drama, not only terrorism, but the same farmer rallies and the pretense of spontaneous action against the center, against Modi government and so on. So farmers rally taking over Delhi and all the stories which you'll see played out in the media. Now all this was important because I'm highlighting the leftist ideology taking roots within these spaces in India. I'll come back to this shortly when we look at the bigger picture around India. Next, I want to point out to you what happened with the Supreme Court after we last discussed this, of the events in Bengal, where the doctors had gone on a strike because of the rape of a woman doctor by somebody who was close to the ruling party, which is full of dacoit gundaism. What was interesting was the Supreme Court announced that they had taken over so motu on their own. What did they do next? They started a parallel investigation which suppressed the actual CBI investigation. And finally, and I told at that time, watch the game, finally what happened subsequently, the Supreme Court Chief Justice ordered the doctors to call off the strike. What is interesting here is they ordered the doctors to call off the strike. They didn't order the state government to initiate proceedings to ensure such a thing doesn't happen. They not only ordered the doctors to call off, when they did not call off the strike, the Supreme Court Chief Justice threatened consequences. He actually said, we threaten you with consequences. So I asked myself, what's the worst he can do? And on what authority can he order someone to call off a strike? Because under the Constitution, you have a right to go on a strike. You have a right to protest peacefully, etc. And he's actually making a statement threatening people as if he's ruling the country like the old dominating kings. And nobody in the media raised a squeak. There were a few articles, but the mainstream media did not raise a squeak. So it's interesting, and the doctors still held on. and they refused to respond. The Supreme Court went silent. Eventually, there was an agreement with the chief minister to set things right, but the media suppressed everything from that point on. Once they found the threats were not working, they went silent. And I found this very important because something critical had shifted in the West Bengal collective consciousness. Something has been waking up. And the consequences of this I expect to see in the next couple of years. At the same time as in Bangladesh, which is again the Bengali people, East Bengal, you'll say, where there was a takeover of hardline, hardcore Islam, you had this happening in West Bengal. So something is brewing generally in that space, but in very different directions, one would say. I'm going to touch upon this also. In Bangladesh, as a consequence, what we saw, remember, was it was a military takeover. They put Muhammad Yunus as the front, as a Nobel laureate. All pictures relating to Bangladesh, you'll have his smiling face. So you look at that picture and it's meant to program you to relax. Hey, this guy is soft, nothing to worry. What is not shown to you is the hardcore Islamic military behind him, of whom he is the puppet, and the decisions they are taking. And every step they have taken decisions to bring arms from West Pakistan, to bring training programs from West Pakistan for training the terrorists to be sent into India. The entire border has again flared up and a lot of negative things happening. While at the same time, which is typically when hardline ideologies take over, the currency is collapsing. There's a food shortage and India just sent a shipload of rice and more food to follow. But why? At the same time, they're abusing India and begging for food at the same time. What exactly is happening? So I want to share my understanding, and I'm going to quote from Sri Aurobindo, where he says something to this effect, that for any civilization to recover its soul, the recovery of its language is essential. And then he points to how Bengal is the first state within India at that time, 100 years ago, to take back its language, and as a consequence has also found its soul, or is in the process of finding its soul. And subsequently, soon after that happens, you have the greatest scientists, the greatest leader, the greatest poets, literators, all awakening, and the freedom movement struggle itself rooted in Bengal. And of course, the British had to partition Bengal at that point to prevent this from growing. And the partition was done on communal lines, that is, the Muslim majority area versus the Hindu majority area, to split them, to make Muslims a political force. So all this is a backdrop, but he points to Bengal particularly in this way. And I've always asked myself, how from there could there be this fall? It's a discussion we have had. But what I'm pointing to now is the stirring of the reawakening. So while something is happening in West Bengal, which is more obvious, and I think we will see the results in the next 1 or 2 years, but it's not so obvious in Bangladesh because there has been a coup, and it's a military coup. But I suspect, it's a feeling still, and we will see how that works, this coup will actually cause the underlying consciousness of the people to be woken up, to be shaken up. Sri Aurobindo points to this again. He points to how the First World War and Second World War, although they were contrary to the unifying objectives of nature and the divine Shakti, are used by her. And he explains this is often a method used, that the thing which is contrary, which is latent, must be brought up, exposed in order to be faced and dealt with. So in East Bengal, what is called Bangladesh, where the Bengali identity is underlying, which was covered up by the Islamic identity after partition. I read a survey which claimed 90% of Bangladeshis claimed to be direct descendants of Muhammad, because otherwise you're not a true Muslim. You know how that works. So, obviously, which is not true. But underlying is still the Bengali value system, hopefully still intact. And so when this hardline Islam takes over, it may just be enough to trigger the reaction from the grassroots. So I may even look forward to a potential, not necessarily that it will happen, but a potential for a counter coup, where the Awami League, in this case, Sheikh Hasina's party, they have not been sitting silent. I'm sure they are also recouping. will at some point organize and overthrow the present government. And very likely, the nation soul, if it is still has a power, may rise up and push forward its identity and overthrow radical Islam. It's possible. But it's one of those things where it's as if you have to go through the darkness before you can wake up. And for this, we'll come back to this idea again when we discuss US elections. But I want to quickly cover a few other points. Sri Lanka has a new president who is also declared hardcore Marxist. Nepal Prime Minister is hardcore Marxist. Bhutan is under pressure from China. And they're openly saying, the king is openly saying that we're under pressure from China not to align too much with India. Kamala Harris, who was Trump's opponent in US elections, her father is a hardcore Marxist. Now, if he's hardcore Marxist, obviously she is also, even though the media won't tell you. And one of the things which they did, in fact, as typically the Marxist mentality, they put Tulsi Gabbard on the terror watch list. So when she tried to fly a plane, she was travel by plane, she was given a special stripped down search. When she asked why, they told her she was on a terrorist watch list. This is typically the Marxist ideological suppression of freedom. But I'm pointing to all around India, there is an encircling of Marxist ideologies, and in the middle, you find the same ideologies. This is a serious threat. It's not something to be taken casually. Nevertheless, if you had to look for a positive outcome from all this, if it could be, it might be that negative layer that's needed to be overthrown by deeper truth, if that is still present or half awake. If there is any hope for the future for these spaces, it is by that underlying truth. When it faces the shadow, is the term they use in modern psychology, but when it faces an opposing negative force and it triggers its own stronger awakening, that's often a mechanism used by nature to push forward a deeper truth. That's what Sri Aurobindo has explained to us. So I'm pointing to all this with the hope, perhaps this might still happen. When, how long, we don't know. Depends on how much people have woken up. But all this is also to set a background for the most important event, perhaps, which is Trump's victory and what has happened subsequently. And I want to touch upon this. Remember, Trump had his 4 years, during which time he was opposed in every way, by media, by the bureaucracy, by Hollywood stars, by pretty much everywhere, anywhere that the cabal had some influence. Biden comes to power in a way that Trump said actually involved deception or electoral deception of some kind. They claimed they had evidence. I've seen some of the evidence which was put online by that side. But Trump did nothing. This was interesting. Almost as a strategy, Trump did not, he kept saying that there was a lot of electoral fraud. He said it openly, but he did not push it. They did take it to court a few times. The courts threw it out and he did nothing further. And this is important because I see this as part of a larger strategy, and I also see this as part of the working of the divine Shakti through nature, that you were given 4 years of what it would be to not have Trump and to follow that woke ideology. And so you had Biden, Kamala Harris, and all the rest who were promoted by the media, who were promoted by the big social media, big tech companies, by the Hollywood stars, by the bureaucrats, and everywhere where you said, oh, this is the best thing which should happen to the US, you saw the decline of the US economy. You saw the condition that things were brought to, the nearly 12 million illegal immigrants which were settled all across the country because they could swing votes. The same story happening in West Bengal. They allow Bangladeshis in, give them voting cards, voting rights, so that the party in power stays in power, and so on. All this was being set. Now in the balance, if you had 12 million voters, what about the rest of the United States? Would people wake up enough, or would these 12 million be enough to overwhelm the votes? And this is where it's a very interesting example of what can happen when people wake up. The number of people that awoke in the US who earlier hated Trump or feared him or perhaps even continue to fear him, but at least recognized that voting for Kamala Harris or Biden ideology was more harmful, the number that woke up was far greater than the potential for electoral fraud or even the 12 million new voters if they could have been made to vote. That shift is the most dramatic change I want to point to, and it is in such a shift that the future of humanity is held, not just in the United States, everywhere on earth. Because now we are seeing this battle of ideologies and mind control. And I mean this in a very practical way, through social media, through news, through the false information you're fed and the way you're manipulated. You are hackable creatures. The Davos World Economic Forum has declared you're hackable creatures and you deserve to be hacked if you can be hacked. Why not? Isn't it? So it's survival of the fittest. That's the mentality there. So the fittest are going to hack you and use you. What's the hope? People waking up. And enough people waking up so that we don't have to go through that suffering. And this is what happened in the US. What is astounding in this case is despite, and there were still news reports of electoral fraud, despite the attempt to fraud, the numbers were so large the fraud could not overwhelm. Despite hacking of voting machines, the numbers were too large. And what you saw, unlike Trump's first presidency, you saw that he won the popular vote equally. Now, this is a key difference many in India may not appreciate, that in the United States system, there is the electoral college. So sometimes a state with smaller number of people may have more voting power than a state with a larger number of people. The reason being, in the US, the population is distributed in a very unbalanced way. The majority of the US population is in New York and on the West Coast, generally in the California region. The majority is there. So if you go by majority vote, it's these two places which will dominate the entire country. So it was part of the design of the Constitution that each state had a proportional representation of a kind. Even if total number of votes were low, it had a representation. And so the Electoral College can vote a president even though he doesn't have a majority in absolute numbers of the country. So the last time when President Trump came to power, it was like this. He did not have the popular vote, but he had the electoral vote. So many declared him as not my president, and there was a whole drama around that. This time he won overwhelmingly the popular vote. In other words, the majority of the United States citizens woke up enough that even if they don't like Trump, the other side was far worse. The woke ideology was not theirs, and they swung. And very likely, one of the major turning points was the number of immigrants and the effect that it was having on life and values and the law and order in the United States. So this became a major turning point. So Trump now suddenly comes to power dramatically. Again, I want you to look back at the events just before, because you see something very strange. Unlike earlier times, while everybody in the media was abusing Trump, all the heads of the social media were abusing Trump. About 1 month before, they all went silent. The heads of social media telephoned Trump and apologized for not doing enough the last time. This included Mark Zuckerberg and various others. And the heads of media who controlled many of the newspapers refused to endorse Kamala Harris, which they had always done. So I think it was Washington Post, which is owned by Amazon head, refused to endorse Kamala. She got very upset. Democratic Party was upset. Why? And I want you to understand, you have to look behind the scenes. The social media heads already knew that Trump would win an overwhelming victory. They did not want to create an enemy of him. So they had already begun to pacify him 1 month before. And I'm going to explain to you how this works. So every time you look at your telephone, you watch some messaging, you click a like. You are telling the social media AI, artificial intelligence, your thinking. If you click 3 different points of indication of your interest, that is enough for the artificial intelligence to identify your loyalties and your overall type. So what they do very in the beginning is they will feed you a lot of very different contrary media messaging, and observe what you pay more attention to, where you click a like, or where you avoid and change to something else, or a few keywords of what you search. Just that is enough to already profile you. Subsequently, when they feed you material for and against, they watch your response. And the response is done in many ways. How long did you watch a video? Did you stop it halfway? How many seconds of a 1 minute video did you actually watch? Did you flip? Did you switch? Did you change it? Did you pause longer? Did you let it run a second time or a third time? That shows your interest and your inclination. With that, they've already profiled you and can predict who you will vote for. So at the highest level of the social media, let's say Mark Zuckerberg, he has on his screen lots of data analysis. Among them is who will vote for whom. And the total number is shown. And he sees there already the overwhelming popular vote for Trump several months before. And they do everything possible to swing the people who are still uncertain. And about 1 month before, it's quite clear that despite all their efforts, he's going to win, and they all start bending over backwards to apologize or to please or not make an enemy of him at least. And I want you to observe this, because it tells you the kind of power that is involved, the kind of knowledge that the artificial intelligence has and the control it has on humanity. And what they can do in anticipation, because they know these things already. And it's scary when you think of that. And the implications for your freedom of speech or your freedom of action is quite disturbing. So Trump comes to power. He's just been elected. He's not yet come to power. He's just been elected, and there's still another 2.5 months before he will come to power. In the first 3 days, 72 hours, what happened? And there's a list. I put a link to that because it's quite fascinating. It's a television commentator who lists this. And they call it the Trump effect. And the Trump effect we saw the first time. Before he got elected, already things had started changing because they knew he was going to do what he said. And it was the same story now. So just after he has been elected, within the first 72 hours, he appoints the first female White House chief of staff in US history. And remember, Kamala Harris was supposed to be the party of women. Trump did something which no one had ever done. Next, you saw all the economic indicators, Dow, NASDAQ, S&P, all reaching major highs. In other words, the stock market wanted Trump to win, or was happy that Trump won. Economically, it would benefit the US. It's not about poor or rich. It's about overall US wealth. Third, he announces deportation of all illegal immigrants. Immediately, the migrant caravan, which was daily in the thousands flooding the US across the border, drops to half. And all of them are upset. All of them were getting phone cards before they reached US shore. Can you imagine how organized this is? You had these people, and you'll be shown on television or photographs, thousands of people walking. They are waving the flag of their country as they walk into the US. Did you understand what that means? When someone walks into your country waving the flag of their country, they're not coming as refugees, they're coming as invaders. All of them have mobile phones that on entering the US they can switch on and use to make US calls. The US SIMs have been given to them, not sold, given to them before they've entered. They're all fresh, bathed, wearing shoes which have barely worn out, no dust on their clothes. So in between what happened, and if you go into the real story, you find George Soros, for example, being one of the institutions that was funding buses to bring them from their country, travel across Mexico, and then near the border, they would drop them off to walk the last part. And they would be given equipment, food, phone SIM cards, and so on to cross into the US. So you have to ask yourself, why would these institutions fund people to walk into the US and give them money, give them resources? And there are implications we have touched before. But so the moment Trump announces this, the caravan drops to half, and they have stopped giving them free phone cards. You see, the people giving the cards stopped giving it. You see the chain behind and the fear that they had. Okay. Hamas declares within 3 days that it wants to end war with Israel. Hezbollah, already the leadership is gone, is also talking about truce within 3 days of Trump coming to power, being elected, not coming to power, being elected. Ukraine and Russia both announced that they want to talk with Trump about ending the war. There's a news report, I think I've put a link to that, which says Ukraine's exhausted troops are waiting for Trump inauguration because they know when he comes to power, the war will stop. European Union announces that they plan to shift to buying US oil instead of Russian oil. Think about this. NATO is supposedly through a proxy war through Ukraine fighting Russia, while European Union is buying Russian oil and Russian gas. They're funding Russia to continue the war. And the moment Trump is elected, they say we'll stop buying oil from Russia and start buying oil from US. Why? Just think about this. The implications are so fantastic. Think about the games behind that they have been playing, which you were deceived to have a totally different impression. Let me put it in more blunt terms. European Union was paying Russia to continue fighting Ukraine while they sent their old weapons and old tanks to Ukraine to fight Russia. Does that make sense? And the moment Trump gets elected, this will stop funding Russia to continue the war. Think about this, let it sink in, think of the implications. It's fascinating and it really changes your perspective of what's happening in the world. And again, it's within the first 3 days of Trump after being elected, Taliban announces hope for, I quote, new chapter with the United States. Why is Taliban suddenly saying that they want to have a new chapter with the United States when just a while back, while Biden was US president, they were massacring Americans? 10,000 Americans were left behind to fend for themselves when Biden withdrew the troops. Gave away all the equipment, 80 billion worth of equipment to the Taliban. And they were abusing the United States left and right, killing American citizens or informers. Trump gets elected and they announce that they are hoping for a new chapter with the United States. Why? And I'll remind you of something which maybe you may not have known. While Trump was president the last time, and the Taliban was killing US army men or US citizens in Afghanistan, Trump had a satellite photo of the house of the head of Taliban sent to him with the message, if you don't stop killing American troops, we will finish you. This was made public afterwards. And it stopped. It stopped the killing of American troops then. When Biden came to power, the killing again started. Trump comes back to power and immediately Taliban wants peace with America. Think of how this works. Think of the mentality. Think of the ideology. And think of what Trump has done. He's done nothing. He's just got elected. But they know he means business. China announced hope for peaceful coexistence with the United States. Isn't that strange? Just a while back, they were having this economic war with the US, and suddenly they speak of peaceful coexistence, no more talking about invading Taiwan. And all this within 72 hours of Trump getting elected. He's not even come to power. And this is what is being referred to as the Trump effect. There are only two people with whom I've seen this effect. One is Donald Trump, and the other is Narendra Modi in India. From the point when it's obvious that they're going to get elected, already a chain reaction starts. And why is this? Because the bulk of politicians that you see today in the world do not speak what they think, do not act what they speak. They play a game of deception and empty words. Make promises which they never keep. Can be easily bought out or pressured or threatened into taking any decision that goes against national interest. But when somebody comes to power who will speak what they think and act what they say, and will not sell their soul or sell national interest, the cabal is threatened. And they will do everything to remove those people or eliminate them. So, 2 attempted assassinations on Trump that we know of recently, even while he was fighting elections. There's still some danger. I'll come to that shortly. And the same with Narendra Modi. And this is an indication that the people who are, you don't have to like them again, I remind you, you don't have to like Trump, you don't have to like Modi, but you know what they stand for. They will protect national interest, whatever that may be. Or they will do what they think will protect national interest. We can be critical of them, no problem. But appreciate what they represent, what they stand for, and in what way it threatens the existing control and power system and the cabal. But I was describing how these 2 people, Narendra Modi and President Trump, what they stand for and why the cabal is afraid of them. And again, you don't have to like them, but just recognize that these are people who will do what they think is in national interest without compromise. They cannot be bought out. They cannot be threatened or manipulated. Narendra Modi still is relatively more weak than Trump because there is still not enough strength economically and militarily for India to stand on its own. So there are certain pressure points where one can see that he has given in, but first with strategic intent. I remember this was something I have mentioned before, perhaps a few decades ago, when I had a discussion with somebody in the Indian military, and they were saying that until India has the missile capability to hit a specific distance and the ability for nuclear weapons to take it to that distance, India cannot stand on its own in world affairs because anyone can bully it into silence in extreme situations. And I had thought about that for a long time, and eventually I had to agree that this was unfortunately the reality of the current political international scenario. So what we do see is the place of the military in the current international affairs. So Donald Trump has a huge advantage, let's put it that way. Subsequently, in the next few weeks after Trump, of course, you had the usual media criticism of him, criticism of Elon Musk, etc. But soon we saw Biden enforcing stronger penalties against Chinese companies, and Chinese equipment makers were found to be putting spyware in their equipment. Now, why didn't he do that for all these years? Well, because Trump got elected. So he had to start taking steps, which if Trump did just a month later, would have exposed Biden for not having done it. Similarly, Trump demanded that the US troops pull out entirely from Syria, saying it's not our problem. Let them fight it out. Now, it's the first time a US president is talking like this. Get out of the war. It's not our problem. And of course, there are situations where it does concern the US, where also he spoke up, Panama being one of them. Now, many of you may not know that the Panama Canal was built by the United States, and for many decades, nearly a century, it was controlled by the US troops, protected and controlled. And if I remember right, some nearly 150,000 American lives, military mostly, died for constructing the Panama Canal. And mostly they were deaths due to mosquito, dengue, and other forms. But subsequently they stayed there. And it was Jimmy Carter, Democrat, who gave away the Panama Canal to the country, Panama country, for $1. Since then, what has happened? Of course, it was initially under the Panama country control. Since then, what has happened? Gradually, China has come in, and Chinese military troops are involved in controlling the Panama passages. So Trump immediately pointed to that and said, look, either you remove them or we have to come back and take control. So you see, on the one hand, he says, take away US troops from Syria, which doesn't concern the US. Panama is a strategic asset for US. And so there he asserts, again, you don't have to agree with him, but you understand how the mind works and the interests which he's standing for. And Trump released a 10-point plan to dismantle the deep state. I've put a link to that. It doesn't give the details of the plan, but it gives the main points of the plan. He openly says there is a deep state which is destroying America, and you have to dismantle this. the strategy, the steps he will take to dismantle it. Something like that you saw happening in India, but in a very indirect way when Narendra Modi initially, first 6 months, I think, he was removing obsolete laws and rules of bureaucracy and systems. But dismantling the bureaucracy is a bigger challenge. In India, at least, the only way Modi could do that was to bypass the bureaucracy by putting everything online. Where earlier you had to go to the government office to pay your electricity bills, now you could pay online, and it knocked out the intermediate layer of corruption. So the same objectives but done differently. And interestingly, there's a very interesting news article that came up. It's titled like this: Biden mulls preemptive pardons for Anthony Fauci, Liz Cheney, and other high-profile officials amid fears of Trump-led prosecutions. Now, this is the title of an article, and I've not put the link. Maybe I'll put it later. What is interesting here is, US president has the right to pardon anybody of any crime. But if you have committed a crime, here the discussion is Biden should pardon them before they are prosecuted for crimes they may have committed without us knowing, or crimes which officially they have not yet committed. Interesting. And the names are Anthony Fauci, Liz Cheney, and others. Why is this important? If you saw the evidence during the COVID lockdowns and the statements Fauci made, the evidence and the scientific evidence which contradicted his statements, not only at that time but subsequently later over the next few years, including the fact which was and instead there was a cover-up and Anthony Fauci was part of the cover-up. So it's as if at some point, if there's an investigation, it will be obvious that Fauci was involved in a cover-up and that crimes were committed, even by lying or hiding from the US president. When that comes to power, of course, there will be consequences. So it's as if knowing this in advance, they are mulling a preemptive pardon before you can officially prove that it's a crime. You're going to pardon whatever they did just in case it turns out to be a crime. Think about the implications of that again. It's quite fascinating. And soon after, maybe a week after Trump had been elected, there was this talk, and the media was highlighting this, that they should ask Biden to step down, resign voluntarily, which would force Vice President Kamala Harris to become president. Just so that you could have a woman president, irrespective of her competence, in name. And you think about, again, the ideology which wants to do that. Where, because it's a woman, she has to be made president, even by hook or crook or by subterfuge, in order to be able to say, we got the first woman president. It's an ideology that does not look at the value and competence of a person. It looks for only symbolic gestures. That's the woke ideology, where the symbolism is more important than the realism. And the symbolism is also a pretended symbolism. At the end of the day, it's not real. So there were also massive ripple effects across the world. In the Romanian election, somebody who was like a Trump, and nobody expected him, he was called right-wing by the media. Of course, anyone they don't like, they call right-wing. But in contrast to extreme left-wing, if you put it that way, then everyone else is extreme left-wing. So this so-called right-wing person gets a first step of the election, and the European Union intervenes and makes a judge overthrow the election, saying that this should not be allowed. He should not be allowed to become president. Now think about what that means. You just had a democratic election, and European Union steps in, uses the judiciary to overthrow the electoral result. And nobody raises a squeak anywhere in the world. It's almost as if in the woke ideology, the woke people are allowed to overthrow democracy in the name of protecting democracy. You see the internal contradiction. But this was one of the ripple effects of Trump. There were effects in France's elections, in France's politics, and the BRICS, which is the group of countries which includes India, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others now. which were forming a economic, let's say, counterweight to the United States and the US dollar particularly, had been speaking of putting out a new currency to counter the US dollar, or at least to trade internally among their own currencies. Trump came out with a statement threatening 100% tariffs on BRICS if they undercut the US dollar. Immediately, US dollar started surging and strengthening where it was sinking earlier. And the Indian rupee began to fall in relation to the US dollar. Immediately, just with a statement. You see the power of a man who is known to do what he thinks or says. What I want to also point to is quite fascinating, the cabinet that Trump has announced already. Elon Musk, which we have already discussed as a major disruptor, will be heading the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, for the first time in human history, we're going to have a Department of Government Efficiency, which will look at how to make the government efficient and remove inefficient and unnecessary elements. What Modi tried to do in a very mild way with the bureaucracy against him will be done in a forceful way and set a standard across the world. When the US does this, it will have a ripple effect. All countries will start doing, because you will see the benefit of this. He puts Tulsi Gabbard, again someone, a disruptor we have spoken of before, as the Director of National Intelligence. It's again a fascinating choice as being a disruptor. RFK Jr. for health, again a major disruptor. This is a man who's spoken against vaccines. He's spoken against the pharma industry. He's exposed so many perversions of the medical system. Stands for cleaning up medicine itself, medical treatment, and the industrial interests which are against good health. And he speaks of this, and he's being given charge of health. So again, you can see these are major disruptors for the entire industry. Kash Patel, of Indian descent, to head FBI. This is again a man who, if you see his statements going back the last 8 years about, let's say, has been speaking against the deep state, against the cabal, taking steps to expose them, and so on. So this is going to be a really important cleanup, and many others. All are disruptors, all are idealistic but pragmatic and cannot be bought out or threatened. This is the important thing. So the consequences, potentially, if Trump reaches actual inauguration, are enormous for the US and for the world, in a good way. Of course, there are now the dangers, and this I want to touch upon. One is that he is still at risk. There have been 2 attempts, as you know. He is still at risk, and the risk has not gone. There are still opportunities. The January 6th, for example, is when there will be the formal electoral process of the electorate and subsequently a chain which follows. But there are many steps in between still. And you already see the other side, cabal interests, openly speaking of spoiling things for Trump as quickly as possible. So Biden is pumping funds to Ukraine before Trump comes to power to stop those funds. So make the funds transfer quickly, transfer the weapons quickly, amplify the war, speed up whatever they needed to do in their agenda. So this is happening parallelly, and the attempt to spoil things so much that when Trump comes to power, the economy would sink. And I've indicated before what had happened long back in the first Trump presidency, that within the first few months, the US stock market had dropped 666 points exactly. And this came as headlines with the number, which is the satanic number for the cabal, very important. And it was a signaling of the cabal to show the control that they had. Such things may still happen. But more seriously, what you see now happening, which is actively happening presently, is these drones which are being seen all over New York City, New Jersey, Florida, and some of the other parts near military installations. At night, you have drones in large numbers. According to some reports, up to 200 drones, some of them coming in from the sea. So there was one senator who speculated that it was an Iranian ship that was sending these drones with bombs over US cities. And the Biden administration kept saying, we don't know what they are. The US military said, we don't know whose they are. And imagine you're allowing drones which are the size of a large car, carrying human beings, coming over cities for hours at a time at night. So they would start by 8 p.m., stay up to midnight, sometimes longer, wander around or stay on the same spot. And whenever someone came near, they would move away. Whose drones? What are they doing? Nobody knows. Eventually, the Biden administration came out with a statement saying that these are legitimate drones. They could be private, they could be military, but they're legitimate, but we don't know who they are. How do you say they're legitimate then? Interesting. Now, the reality is, according to insiders leaking this information, that they had detected that in some part of the United States, nuclear material was being transported secretly. And this was detected by nuclear detectors of radiation. And the drones were looking for the source of where that nuclear fissile material is actually being kept currently or being transported. So at night, particularly when there were perhaps less traffic, or certain sensors would be more sensitive, or people would not be able to see what they were doing so as not to cause a panic, they were looking for this. Now, why would this be important? Trump made a statement initially. He said, oh, let Biden say what the drones are, otherwise shoot them down. Then later he said, we don't know what they're doing, and I'm not going to go to those spaces where the drones are going, suggesting that there's actually a physical danger there. What that danger is, it seems to be nuclear material, something with radiation. And this has been confirmed by intelligence sources within the government, but also confirmed by people who have the remote viewing ability, which you will find in those circles also, these statements. So that's why I'm saying this with some reasonable conviction that this is the case. And finally, so many statements being made by members of the Democrat Party and their government that they will do everything to oppose any step that Trump takes. That's part of the game, I suppose, of politics, but there will be a lot of pushback. And one of the forms of pushback would be to try to sink the US economy while Trump is in power so as to blame him, apart from, of course, threat to his own life. But I'm assuming that the group that's protecting him will take care of all these. And so with some caution, we look with optimism to this major disruptive action across all the governance systems of the United States, which will have a ripple effect across the world and hopefully initiate a shift in consciousness and its consequences in systems and its consequences in actual circumstances that affect our lives collectively. So this is the direction we're looking at the past, looking to the future with some cautious optimism. This is the big picture I wanted to share. So I maybe look at the chat box, and Narad, if you want to say anything.
I'd like to ask about Rangaswamy.
About?
Ramaswamy?
Yes. Vivek Ramaswamy. Yes, I don't know what is the position he's being offered or whether he's in Trump's cabinet. I didn't see his name in the list I was looking at, but he's one of the extraordinary persons. In fact, what you saw during the election cycle was the conviction that he transmitted and the clarity and rationality with which he articulated his ideas with practical suggestions of what he would do, in many ways rivaled Trump. He does not have the track record of management that Trump has, but he had a far greater clarity and communication. So I see in him another extraordinary instrument that Trump will also empower, along with the others that I've mentioned, some of them. So I don't know what role he's going to play, but I'm sure at some point he will play a major role also.
Thank you.
Yes, so Sumana is asking about Mark Obern's talk in February. There will be something, but the dates are not yet fixed. We will know hopefully by next week. Radiance is asking, Cabal is doing their best to prevent Trump and Musk disruptor team with targeted attacks. India will have to fight hard, tapping its Shakti. Yes, this is going to be the important thing for all of us. The description that I've presented, it's good. You're a spectator watching this, but actually you're a participant. And as a participant, what you do will make all the difference. As I said, because the United States woke up in sufficient numbers, this dramatic shift was possible. If they had not, the opportunity of Trump being missed, I don't think he would have been able to come for the next election cycle. Age wise, perhaps, I don't know what his condition might be. Or he might have continued, or perhaps pushed someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, and maybe another opportunity. But by then, the cabal entrenchment would be much, much more tight, and it would be more difficult. The thing about changes is this: if you don't wake up now when things are relatively easy, it's going to be harder next time. And if you don't wake up then, it's going to be even harder next time. And then sometimes through extreme pain, you will wake up enough and with extreme difficulty overcome. I'll give an analogy again, which is more tangible for us. Around the ashram and around Auroville, the mother had insisted, buy the lands now. She said, you don't know the limits of human greed. And up to 1984, I believe, all the land purchases were going smoothly. That's around the time the court cases started, land purchases stopped. And from then on, for a few decades, there were delays and delays. I'm not saying they didn't happen, but the group that was supposed to do was so inefficient, so ineffective. They were raising money and the monies were going into administrative expenses, very little in land. But the delay each time raised the price of land more and more, to a point where today it's practically impossible to spend money to buy land. And yet there has to be a way to do it, because otherwise you can't have the project. Around the ashram, it's finished. The land prices have shot up so much, it's practically impossible to get anything nearby. And all those lands have become now tourist centers for hotels, restaurants, etc., spoiling the atmosphere of the ashram. The people who were supposed to be as sadhakas around the ashram, holding and protecting and receiving from the center the radiance, were moved out far away. So now the center doesn't have the protection, and the practitioners do not have the support of the spiritual consciousness. Everything becomes more difficult. Is there a way out? Not in the immediate distance of our lifetime, at least. Because with each passing year, it becomes more difficult or even impossible. Well, now you have to manage in a condition which is more difficult. I'm giving this as a very painful example because it pinches us every day almost, as what happens if you delay the waking up. So it is a huge, I will say, grace and an opportunity that the American people woke up enough to give Trump this huge lift, and the consequences will be enormous. Can this also happen in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan perhaps, in India even more perhaps, and in every country? If it can, then this passage of difficulty and pain, which the United States saw for 4 years under Biden, would have been worthwhile, even if it was painful, to wake up now rather than to wake up after another 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, when things will be far more difficult, with so much needless pain and suffering. And this is where we are at in terms of consciousness. So our awakening and our invoking of the divine Shakti and aligning with the divine will make a huge difference. Nitin is asking about Stephen Greer and Disclosure Project staged alien invasion. There's a lot of speculation around that the government will stage an alien invasion, etc. Yes, perhaps this was part of a cabal plan. As you can see, there were many steps to that plan. One was, of course, the Cold War, and then there was the terrorist war, and then the third was supposed to be the asteroids war. And you can see how that's coming true. And the fourth would have been an alien invasion. That was the cabal plan as it was leaked by one of the insiders. So we are at the third stage. You will see regularly Google News or other news platforms pushing messages like one football-sized asteroid heading for the Earth. No, it's not heading for the Earth. 2 large asteroids which can destroy cities is going to zoom past the Earth. Will we survive? Headlines of this kind. And all in the last 6 years. 6 years approximately, because it started in the middle of Trump presidency. They started pushing these messages. And the goal of that, of course, is what can we do to protect Earth from the asteroids? Well, we have to do a whole missile system in space and so on. They will do the weaponization of space. But this kinds of crazy messaging to create fear mongering based on asteroids that you have to be afraid of, that's being pushed forward. So it's very much in that agenda. So perhaps it will reach a stage of a staged alien invasion. But I believe Trump coming to power will break a lot of these plans. So I don't know if such a thing would happen. So Radiance is saying Indian judiciary is holding back economic growth, social accountability. Yes, but it's not as if they're doing that consciously. They are pushing an agenda which serves their short-term interest. For a judge who was a lawyer before, the more you delay the cases, the more the lawyer makes the money. And he was a lawyer before. And the more he makes money. So it's all about short-term thinking, not caring about people. And that's part of the reform that the judiciary has to go through. And we have, unfortunately, the same problem pretty much all over the world right now. Many interesting comments. Those of you who are interested, you can go through all of them. I'm just looking for any important questions which we could deal with. Okay, so there's one question from Jerry. Who has seen law enforcement photographs of Donald Trump's bullet lacerated right here? Nobody, such photo does not exist. That's not true. Actually, the photos do exist, and there are videos also which show that. So this was unfortunately one of the games that the cabal played, that they tried to present the assassination attempt itself as a staged attempt. Now, if you look at it from a very practical perspective, a bullet grazing your ear, tearing flesh, is not something you're going to risk, first of all. It's not a game you play. And second, if you see the extent to which there were lapses that day, it showed a plan from the Secret Service. And Trump, in fact, it was a very close call. In the moment when he turned, and the head turned, otherwise it would have gone straight into the skull. He just turned enough in that moment to look at something, and it grazed, tore a part of the ear. It was a tiny part of the ear, nevertheless, it tore a part of the ear, and the tissue, there was heavy bleeding initially. So all that, yes, it is a fact. It was not a staged thing. But all these stories were pushed into the conspiracy space to play the conspiracy mind, but also to reduce what they saw was a potential sympathy wave for Trump. The FBI head came out with a statement, we don't know if it was a bullet or a shrapnel. It's one of the most stupid statements a person can make. Because a shrapnel means a bullet has to first fragment before a shrapnel. So it doesn't even make sense. But all these statements were amplified by the media, and the fact that mainstream media amplified them, or even this negative speculation, shows you that it was cabal agenda and not reality. So just keep this in mind when you look at... My goal here, remember, is to empower you to do your own analysis and to look behind the scenes. So be careful. Don't trust just because it's in the conspiracy space. Not all sources are even valid. There are a lot of conspiracy sources which will make conspiracy out of anything because they have to keep pumping something every week to keep their interest and their viewership, to make money on the side. So they'll make up any story to keep you active, to keep you excited or speculative information because they earn money. Distrust those. The real sources will not have something every week. Or they'll run out very quickly of useful things, and at some point they'll have to tap into either fantasy or say there's nothing new. So, yeah, so interesting. There's a comment from Jessica. There were thousands of others also watching with me. I took screen photos with my phone and was stopped by Gmail postmasters from sending any of them. They were red listed. So, in fact, when people were circulating these photos, there was an attempt by social media to block those photos. And that's one of the things which Mark Zuckerberg also apologized to Trump about. And the other thing he apologized was them blocking the story about Hunter Biden's laptop, which had a lot of perverse content and the connection with China, which they had blocked at that time, saying it was fake news. So Neeraj is asking, why would they burn down Notre Dame? That's one of the strange ones. I think I've mentioned it before, that there's actually a photograph of Michelle Obama on a boat that day on the River Seine, drinking a glass of wine, and on the wine glass you can see the reflection of the burning Notre Dame. The entire group was there watching from the river while Notre Dame was burning. And there were very interesting details of the videos, which also at that time were clearly seen. The wood which was burning, you could see the flames, the wind pushing the smoke in a direction, but the fire was going the other direction. And there was no clear explanation of how this could be. So there was some speculation that this was actually an arson attempt. It was done by a certain cabal group because, well, they hate the things which relate to higher values, including Christianity and so on. But I can't go further into that other than whatever evidence was there. Why would they do it? Because they belong to a different value system, which is Asuric. Okay. Dolores says Argentina already showed the World Department of Government Efficiency. I didn't know that. It's possible, but I don't know enough about that. I will not comment. So that's about it, I think. Remember, my intention is not to inform you. As I said, most of you would be more informed about events. It's to let you see what's behind what you're told or shown. And always the attempt is why, who benefits, what are the interests, how much of this would be true, does it make sense, is it internally consistent, even logically. Sometimes you find statements which do not match, or statements have been changed, and that's when you have to pause, ask, question, go deeper, look for alternate sources, but don't trust all sources. You have to let the sources also build trust over time, not because they were right once or twice, but also see consistency of information that comes. Very nice saying, do you know Whitney Webb? She says that we have to worry about most is about the CBDC, central bank. So I don't know about them, but this is the point, central bank digital currency. Okay. So I know about this as an issue because, as you saw, the only existing currency that is outside government control is cryptocurrency, generally, under that Bitcoin and various others. But it is the only currency which allows you to be free of government control. If you think about this deeply, you will notice always throughout history, humanity has tried to hold some funds outside government control. It was either in the form of gold, in the form of physical assets, land, or other things which could be at any point sold off, but could not be controlled by the government. Now, of course, in time, the government has tried even to control gold and so on, but there's only so much they can do eventually. And so, when cryptocurrency came, initially they tried to dismiss it, then they tried to control it. When they could not, they tried to now replace it with their own digital currency. Now, as digital transactions increase, and I find now, for example, almost anything I spend, I do it using digital transactions. In India, it's so easy. Makes things so easy, so much more rapid, so much more safe. But naturally then, currency itself becoming digital would be a consequence. So in itself, that's not a danger. The danger is when that currency can be played by the government in ways that you cannot anticipate and you cannot verify. That's where you have a danger. So if it was in some crypto form where there's an objective verification, it might still work. But when the government says, hey, we will give you the currency and we will add to it when we want, basically printing money, but electronically this time, but you have no control over it, then there is potential for misuse as they have misused cash. The US currently is printing so much cash per year. I don't remember what the latest figure is, some trillions, not million, not billion, trillions per year that they're just printing to keep the economy afloat, to keep the dollar afloat, and they require other countries to soak up the US cash and hold it. So India has $600 billion, nearly a trillion approaching, to soak up, and every country is, so to say, bullied to soak up that excess liquidity. Because if India or others just release that, it would make the dollar crash. So the only way US can print and not have inflation is to force other countries to soak up the liquidity and so keep the dollar always in balance. So here you pump and there you suck. Who is sucking? Well, India, China, all the other countries. And they have to buy up the dollars and hold it to survive. Or at least that's the impression you're given. If they release it suddenly, the dollar will collapse. So to ensure that doesn't happen, Trump's threat to the BRICS countries, don't threaten the dollar, we have to protect the dollar. I understand, he's holding the US interest, no problem. So, but digital currency has a danger there because the government can continue to print and not tell you how much they've printed. That's the danger. If it was cryptocurrency, the nature of cryptocurrency is that every transaction is public. You don't know who the person is, but you know it's gone from which account to what. You can't just create and invent amounts, which is why it's automatically protected from inflation. Bitcoin is protected from inflation. It is automatically deflationary in the design. But a government central bank digital currency is not. So yes, there's a real danger there, but it's not in the same way as people make it out to be. That, oh, you will get a barcode on your skin and things like that, or that they will put a chip in you. I want to comment on this a little bit because I've heard this story now going back 35 years, 1989 onwards. Since I first entered the internet, we were warned of this. It's not happened. Or let me put it another way, it has happened, but in a completely different way. They told you they would insert a chip in your skin and you wouldn't be able to buy or sell without that chip, or a barcode on your forehead. That's what first they said. They've made it much simpler. All of you, no exception, all of you are already chipped. Do you know how? You've been programmed to cling to your chip, your mobile phone. That's your chip. They didn't insert it under your skin. They put it in your hand and programmed you to depend on it. If you lose your phone, you lose your life, you lose your identity, you lose your money, your wallet, etc. Your communications, your friends, your address book, everything is there, right? That's your chip. So you're identified with the phone, chip, ID, number, whatever it is. You can't do anything without it. You can't live without it, and so on. So that has already happened. And as far as currency is concerned, printing paper money or printing digital money, it's not too different, except that it's easier to hide in one case. So I don't see any obvious dangers there. The danger is that with the digital money, they can cancel the money which is in your pocket. Because if they track that, if they say, okay, you stole so much, now all the money which is in your hand, now we consider as neutralized. It's effectively as if they could get inside your bank account and take it all out. Or if you had stored cash under your mattress, as they say, they could take that out from you and burn it. That's the control they can have, and then it can get more complex where they can say, your currency will operate only within this area of 10 minutes around your house. So if you try to go outside that area, you can't buy or sell. So that's the kind of control which you can have with digital currency, which potentially could be used to manipulate or control humanity. So the dangers are in that direction, not so much about the currency itself. That would still be pretty much the same as cash. You could have modified that and made local cash circles. But with digital currency, it becomes so much easier. As different from cryptocurrency where you can't do this. So as it seems to be, and Trump is an open supporter of cryptocurrency, this is going to grow. This is going to become a major player in the global currency markets, for sure, for a while at least, until we find quantum computers which could break the encoding system of cryptocurrency. But yes. Rajiv has made an interesting observation. Trump effect did have a huge effect on Canadian leftist politics. Trudeau's downfall has accelerated, yes. And the same with France. France president's downfall also has been accelerated since Trump came to power. Trump even made this very interesting statement. He said, if Canada needs US funds to stay stable economically, then they should just join the US and become the 51st state. And when he says something like that, it's so logical and rational. It's something everybody knows, but no one dares to say. No one dares even can imagine that it's possible. But when he says it, you say, yeah, of course it makes sense. And immediately the political heads in Canada have to prove that they're not dependent on the US, or the pressure starts building, hey, why are we even separate? Oh, we better stay separate. Now we better find ways to distinguish and become more separate. Whatever it is, it sets in place a chain reaction. because the man means what he says and does what he says. This makes all the difference. And it's not just about that, it's also there is a power behind a tapas, a spiritual force. The divine Shakti uses the person as an instrument. The person may not always be conscious. But when there is this action, you have a dramatic amplification of their power. And the ripple effect is also explained largely because of this. It's not just words of somebody who's idealistic. It's a power behind which is also working and using those words to create strong ripples and make changes. So I think this is broadly what I wanted to share. Narad, anything you want to add or comment on?
No, but it was very, very. I think we have to not discount the power of prayer and
Yes.
collective prayer.
That is true. And maybe that's a good note on which to pause for today. That not only people need to wake up, but also just as these disruptors need to have the power, the Shakti to back and work through them, to be able to do good and not bring chaos, so too we need to invoke the Shakti that in our own space, in our own lives, the light may grow. And this precarious balance between the light and dark may tilt decisively in favor of the light. And our prayers for ourselves, for the situation in our nations respectively and in the world, and for the protection of these disruptors who stand for some higher truth or principle, all this is important. All of us should consciously participate in this. And let's then consciously invoke the presence, the help, the protection, the wisdom, and also the love for the right action to be done in the right way. As we close one year and begin to enter a new year, let this grow, let this become the basis for a new hope and a new optimism that will perhaps support humanity in its next steps. Namaste.